Hi, curious people. Welcome to Curious People Wanted, a series by the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where we have lots of artifacts with fascinating stories. My name is Adrienne St. Pierre, and I'm the curator here at the Barnum Museum. Part of my job includes answering research inquiries, and these come from all over the U.S. as well as from countries around the world. Whether it's a high school student writing an essay, a filmmaker making a documentary, a novelist, a history enthusiast, or the author of a scholarly book, we get a wide variety of questions. Often we get calls from people who have an ancestor who worked for the circus, and they're hoping to learn more about that individual. So in this episode, I want to share a wonderful resource that can be very helpful in tracking down your great-great-uncle or whomever. They're called Route Books. And I have to say, even if you aren't looking for a circus ancestor, these booklets are really interesting documents of circus life in the past. Before we get to that, I'd like to show you a photo album that was given to the museum by the relatives of a circus performer. The cover is a soft leather, and it's hand-painted with a lily, and actually is titled Kodak Pictures, rather than photo album. Now, this is an amazing family treasure documenting the circus life of a young girl at the beginning of the 20th century. Her name was Clementine Rooney, and her father, John, also worked in the circus. The album was given to us by an older couple, and their connection to Clementine was really rather a slim thread, and so they thought the museum would be a better home for their little archive about Clementine. They didn't know much about her life because she had died soon after she got married, leaving no children. And then her husband remarried, and very little, if any, information about her was passed on to the children and grandchildren of the second marriage. Luckily, the family did save this photo album and a few other items of Clementine's, like these photo postcards and some route books. And all of that material dates to the first years of 1900. Now, let me gently open this little album. As with most kinds of scrapbooks and albums, it's fragile, so we have to be very, very careful. But I want to show you some of the photographs inside. They're just, they make you smile. These are delightful images, and both the casual and posed scenes in which Clementine and others were clearly having fun and showing off. So I think you really see that people who worked for the circus considered it their family. They all lived and worked and traveled together for many months of the year. And Clementine was a young girl. At this time, I think that might be her in the middle there. And so, of course, she was ripe for fun and friendship at her age. So here she is with three other girls, each eating a big slice of watermelon. So these photos give us a wonderful idea of life behind the scenes, circus life, as well as some nice shots that show the costumes that were worn. Of course, not everyone with a circus ancestor is fortunate enough to have an album like this, but they may have something like an employee ID card or maybe a photo postcard or two, odds and ends that offer some clues. On the whole, doing this kind of family history research is challenging because circus employees may not be included in the kinds of records that people often use to trace their ancestors, things like census records and city directories. And that's because circus people were on the move, traveling for most of the year. So I often suggest looking at circus route books, that's R-O-U-T-E. They can be quite helpful, and they're full of interesting information, but not many people know about them. And even if you're not trying to track down an individual, but you're just interested in circus history and daily life, these are certainly worth browsing. So what are they? Well, route books are a little bit like yearbooks. Each circus published a route book once a year after their season ended. We received 4 route books with Clementine's album and postcard from her years with Barnum and Bailey and Ringling Brothers. As the name implies, route books document the route that a circus traveled, listing all the places where they performed during the circus season, spring through fall. Route books are sometimes called diaries, and here's an example here, a diary or route book, because they often include a short entry with each location telling something notable that happened at that place. It could be weather-related. For example, maybe heavy rains had meant postponing a performance due to the thick, heavy mud. Or it could be that an accident occurred, and that seems to have happened a lot. Or maybe some essential piece of equipment had to be repaired. Or it could be personal, like a child was born into a circus family, or somebody had died or gotten injured. There are all kinds of details that tell you about daily life in the circus, and you certainly gain an understanding of how hard and precarious that lifestyle could be. I believe the earliest examples of route books date to the 1870s, which makes sense because circuses were starting to travel to more distant places then with the expansion of the railroad system. And as printing and photography methods improved, the route books upped their game and began to include photos as well as short articles. They were often quite nice and so became like souvenir books. So what did these have to do with researching an ancestor? Well, route books include lists of all the employees for that season. And these were not limited to the star performers, but they included everyone from riggers and canvasmen and ticket takers to the candy butchers, blacksmiths, and the people who put up posters. Everyone was included. So even if your ancestor worked behind the scenes, he or she would likely be on a list if they were a full season employee. Of course, finding an ancestor on an employee list is much easier if you have a fair idea of when that person worked for the circus and, if possible, which circus they worked for. I sometimes think people assume that if their ancestor worked for the circus in the 1800s, that automatically means he or she worked for Barnum, but there were many other circuses besides Barnum's. And you also have to consider that people did move around working at one circus and then going to another. So, for example, a person may have worked for Barnum for a year or two, but then worked for a different circus. So the important question, where do you find circus route books? Well, thanks to digitization projects and the internet, there are now many route books accessible online on various websites. Here at the Barnum Museum, we have a couple of early ones. We have several from the 1880s. And we had these two, 1882 and 1883, digitized to be put on the Connecticut Digital Archive. I'm really happy that we have these as digital surrogates because the actual paper in these booklets is so very fragile. So, you know, these are the two examples, but I'm not going to open them up because I just don't want to damage the pages. But you can go online and view the entire thing from cover to cover in the Barnum Museum's digital collections in the CTDA. So those are just a couple examples, but you can also find a huge collection of route books online through the Milner Library at Illinois State University. In fact, you can see the same route books from the early 1900s that Clementine Rooney had. This amazing resource was the collaborative effort of the Milner Library, Ringling Museum in Sarasota, Florida, and Circus World in Baraboo, Wisconsin. All three of those institutions have large collections of route books. Now, in this database, you can search by time frame and by the name of the circus, and then you can virtually flip through the booklets to find those rosters of employees. Hopefully, you'll find the person you're looking for. Another resource is the Circus Historical Society website. They compiled information from route books many years ago before people were creating digital surrogates. And sometimes this can make a search more efficient because they have put together the route lists and lists of employees. So to find this, you need to go to the Circus Historical Society's Classic website and look under the Virtual Library tab, and there you will find this information. You'll also see that they culled information from a few census records and a few city directories where a lot of circus people were located. And they also have an alphabetized list from the 1906 Directory of Tent Show People. And that lists the names of all the people who were under the tent and which circus they worked for. Of course, it's not all circus workers, just the show people. As luck would have it, I found Clementine Rooney's father, John, on this list. He was an equestrian, and he also was part of the riding Rooneys, as I believe Clementine was. I just point out this little postcard from Clementine Rooney's archive includes her dad as part of the baseball Ringlings. So he had fun that way too. Even if you don't have a circus ancestor, it's really fun to take a look at route books to discover more about circus life in the past. I hope you've enjoyed learning about them, as well as seeing Clementine Rooney's delightful photo album. Thanks for joining me today, and if you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe by clicking on the bell, and that way you'll be notified when the next installment of Curious People Wanted is available. See you again soon.